The first real father I ever knew was the man my mother married when I was 4 years old. The last man I thanked at my wedding was the one she'd left behind. It happened at the rehearsal dinner. After 24 years of being my dad, after the braces, the car, the college tuition, she introduced her biological father to the room as my real dad. Then she turned to the man who raised her and called him basically the nanny. What she didn't know was what the venue coordinator was about to read aloud at the reception. His name is Robert. For over 2 decades, he performed every duty of a father, legally, financially, emotionally. But in the eyes of the law and in the cruel spotlight of a wedding toast, the title was never really his. This is the story of what happens when a lifetime of quiet devotion meets a single public act of erasure. And it all hinged on a tradition at the reception, the reading of the sponsors, a list Robert had personally funded, line by line. He met Sarah when she was 4 years old, a tiny thing hiding behind her mother's legs in the doorway of a too-quiet apartment. Her biological father, Mark, had left 6 months prior, a disappearance so complete it felt like an amputation. Robert wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just a decent man, an engineer who loved her mother, Linda, and understood that love included the small, silent package of grief and suspicion that was her daughter. The first year was a negotiation of quiet gestures. He'd sit on the far end of the couch during Saturday morning cartoons. He learned to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches the exact way she liked them, crusts off, cut diagonally. He'd tie her shoes before preschool, his large, careful hands fumbling with the tiny laces. She called him Robert, not Dad, not even for a long time, Robert. That was okay. He was building, not replacing. He built a foundation one small, expensive brick at a time. The first major investment wasn't emotional, it was orthodontic. Age 12, a severe overbite. The dentist laid out a 3-year plan, braces, retainers, the whole journey. Linda's insurance covered half. Mark, the biological father, was consulted. His contribution was a one-time check for $500 and a note saying, "Do what you think is best." Robert paid the remaining $11,000 over 36 months. He didn't make a speech about it. He just drove her to every appointment, listened to her complain about the rubber bands, and celebrated with milkshakes when they finally came off. Her smile, straight and confident, was its own reward. Then came the car, her 16th birthday. Linda suggested a used, dependable sedan. Robert remembered being 16, the visceral freedom of your own wheel. He found a 2-year-old Honda Civic, one owner, pristine service records, $8,500. He paid it in full. The title and registration arrived in the mail. He filled out the paperwork, and in the box for the owner's name, he wrote Sarah Elizabeth Miller. Her name, not his, a gift without strings. College was the next mountain. She got into a good state school, but out-of-state tuition was a cliff face. Robert sat at the kitchen table with Linda, the financial aid forms spread out like a battlefield map. His income, stable and solid, disqualified her for most need-based aid. Mark's income, sporadic and unreported, was a ghost in the system. Robert took out a Parent Plus loan in his own name, $52,000. The payments would follow him for 15 years, a monthly reminder of a choice he never regretted. He told her it was a scholarship from his union, a small, protective lie. Through all of it, the bond deepened, or so he believed. The Robert slowly, organically became Dad. It started as a slip, a hurried thanks, Dad, when he handed her lunch money. Then it solidified. He was Dad who helped with calculus homework. Dad who taught her to drive a stick shift in an empty parking lot, his foot hovering over a phantom brake. Dad who sat in a hard plastic chair for 3 hours at her high school graduation, his chest so tight with pride he could barely breathe. But here's the thing about building on someone else's foundation. You never know when the original owner might return to claim the land. Sarah was 22, a college senior, when Mark reappeared. It wasn't a dramatic knocking at the door. It was a Facebook friend request, then a message, then a phone call. He was in a better place, he said, sober, stable, remarried. He wanted to reconnect to make up for lost time. Robert watched it happen from the respectful distance a good stepfather is supposed to keep. He encouraged it. It's healthy, he told Linda. She should know her father. He meant it. He believed a child could have 2 fathers, that love wasn't a finite resource. He was wrong. The reunion started as monthly lunches, then weekend visits. Mark, with his new sobriety and his tales of redemption, was fascinating. He was the fun parent, the cool dad who'd made mistakes, but was now a philosopher of second chances. Robert was the steady parent, the one who asked about retirement savings and reminded her to get an oil change. Dependability became boring. Reliability became background noise. The wedding planning began a year later. Sarah was beaming, holding her fiancé's hand at Sunday dinner. Robert felt the first cold trickle of unease when they discussed the budget. Linda, ever practical, outlined what they could contribute. Robert, without being asked, committed $25,000. It would cover the venue deposit, the catering, the band. He transferred the first $10,000 to the wedding account the next day. Then came the conversation about the father-daughter dance. They were all in the living room. Sarah, scrolling through Pinterest on her phone, said absently, "I think I'll dance with Mark first, for the traditional one, then maybe we can all join in." The heir left the room. Robert just nodded. "Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart." Linda opened her mouth to speak, but Robert caught her eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Keep the peace. That was his mantra. He had spent 2 decades believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as having peace. The wedding week was a whirlwind of final payments. Robert handled them all. The florist, the photographer, the open bar premium. He signed the checks. Robert J. Anderson, stepfather of the bride. The coordinator, an efficient woman named Brenda, had all his contact info. He was the point person for everything financial. The rehearsal dinner was at a cozy Italian restaurant. The mood was light, wine flowing, laughter bouncing off the brick walls. Robert sat beside Linda, feeling a warm, if slightly melancholy, contentment. This was it, the culmination. Then the toasts began. The fiancé thanked his parents. Sarah's best friend told embarrassing college stories. Then Sarah stood glass chiming. She thanked her mother for her strength. She thanked her friends. Then she gestured to a man at the end of the table, a man with Mark's eyes and a new expensive suit. "And I am so grateful," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that my real dad, Mark, is here to walk me down the aisle tomorrow. After everything, you're back where you belong." A wave of affectionate awe swept the room. Robert smiled, a mechanical lift of the cheeks. Then she turned. Her eyes found his. She gave him a warm, generous smile. "And of course, Robert, thank you. You were basically the nanny who drove me to all my stuff and helped Mom out. We couldn't have done it without you." Silence, not a total silence, but a pocket of it right around their table. The air turned to glass. Linda's hand shot out under the table and gripped Robert's knee hard. He heard a faint ringing in his ears. "Basically the nanny asterisk." The words hung in the garlic-scented air, a public casual demotion of 24 years into hired help. He saw Mark, the biological father, raise his glass in a gracious, acknowledging nod, as if accepting a shared compliment. Robert didn't cause a scene. He was a man who kept the peace. He raised his own glass, took a sip of water that tasted like nothing, and excused himself to the restroom. He stood in front of the mirror, looking at the face of a man who had just been erased. The hurt was a cold, heavy stone in his gut, but underneath it something else stirred, something quiet and sharp. He thought of every check he'd written for this wedding. He thought of Brenda, the coordinator, and her meticulous spreadsheet. He walked back to the table. The conversation had moved on. He sat down, and he decided in that moment that he was done keeping a peace that only ever cost him one person, himself. The wedding was in 12 hours. The reception, with its planned traditions, was to follow, and Robert now knew exactly how one of those traditions would go. The wedding morning dawned bright and clear, a cruel parody of perfection. Robert dressed in his charcoal gray suit in silence. Linda watched him from the bathroom doorway, her eyes red-rimmed. "Robert," she began, her voice fragile. He held up a hand. "Not today, Lynn. Today is her day. We'll get through it." Though he felt hollow, a shared life raft on a sea he now realized he'd been navigating alone. The ceremony was held in a garden venue, all white chairs and floral arches. Robert took his seat in the front row beside Linda. The seat reserved for the father of the bride was empty, waiting for Mark. As the processional music began, Mark emerged from the side, beaming, arm extended. Sarah took it, radiant, and they began the walk. Every step was a punctuation mark on the sentence she'd spoken the night before. Robert was a spectator. He was the nanny in the audience. The officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Mark's voice, loud and confident, rang out, "Her mother and I do." Robert felt Linda flinch beside him. "I, not we." A complete erasure. He kept his eyes forward, his face a mask of polite interest, but his hands were clenched so tight in his lap his knuckles were bone white. The reception was in a grand ballroom. Robert moved through the cocktail hour like a ghost, smiling when required, nodding at relatives who offered him sympathetic, awkward pats on the shoulder. He saw Brenda, the coordinator, moving with purpose near the head table, a clipboard in hand. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She gave him a small, professional nod. He had spoken to her once, weeks ago, about the timeline, one particular tradition. Dinner was served. Toasts began again. Mark stood, glass in hand, and told a story about Sarah as a toddler, a story Robert knew by heart because he'd heard Linda tell it 100 times. Mark told it as his own memory. The room laughed. Robert sipped his water. Then came the father-daughter dance. The DJ announced, "For the first dance, please welcome the bride and her father, Mark." The opening chords of a sentimental country song filled the room. Mark led Sarah to the floor. They swayed, smiling, a picture of reunited joy. Robert watched from the shadows near the bar. The dance felt like it lasted an hour. When it ended, the DJ, following the schedule, said, "And now, let's have all the fathers and daughters join the bride on the floor." It was a generic, inclusive prompt, but in the context of that weekend, it was a minefield. Robert stood frozen. Linda nudged him gently. "Go on," she whispered. He didn't move. He saw Sarah, flushed and happy, looking around the room. Her eyes swept past him, then returned. She smiled, a little wave, an invitation, or a consolation prize. That was the moment the last thread snapped, not with drama, but with a profound, chilling clarity. He gave a small shake of his head and turned toward the banquet kitchen doors. He needed air, or maybe he just needed to be anywhere else. He pushed through the swinging doors into the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen staging area, leaned against a stainless steel counter, taking deep, slow breaths. That's when he heard the voices from around the corner, near the service entrance. It was Sarah's voice, light and giddy. "I know, right? It's just so much drama, but Mark's my dad asterisk. Robert is sweet, I guess, but it's not the same. You can't force that bond." A friend's voice replied, "But he paid for like everything. That's gotta count for something." Sarah's laugh was a sharp, dismissive tinkle. "Please, that was his choice. He wanted to play house with my mom. That doesn't make him my father. It makes him my mom's husband who helped out, like a really, really expensive nanny." Robert closed his eyes. The words, private and unfiltered, were worse than the public ones. They revealed a core belief, a foundational ingratitude he had never allowed himself to suspect. He heard footsteps approaching and straightened up. It was Brenda, the coordinator, her clipboard now held to her chest. She looked at him, and for the first time her professional mask slipped, revealing a flicker of something like pity. "Mr. Anderson," she said softly, "we're about to begin the acknowledgements, the sponsors list. Would you like me to?" This was it, the tradition. At this venue, it was customary for the coordinator to read aloud the names of those who had contributed financially to the wedding, thanking them as generous sponsors of today's celebration. It was meant to be a gracious, subtle nod. Brenda had his list, the list he had provided, detailing every vendor he had paid directly. He had a choice. He could tell her to skip it. He could swallow this too, add this final humiliation to the pile, and keep the peace for Linda's sake. He looked past her, through the small window in the kitchen door. He could see the back of Mark's head at the head table, leaning in to tell a joke. He saw Sarah's laughing face. "Read it exactly as I gave it to you, Brenda," Robert said, his voice calm, steady, and utterly cold. "Every single line." She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." He followed her back into the ballroom. The dancing had stopped. The DJ had handed the microphone to Brenda. She stood in the center of the dance floor, a spotlight on her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice amplified and clear. "The bride and groom would like to take a moment to gratefully acknowledge the generous sponsors who have helped make this beautiful day possible." A polite smattering of applause. Robert resumed his seat next to Linda. She looked at him, questioning. He just stared ahead. Brenda looked down at her clipboard. "The couple extends their deepest thanks to," she began reading. "The floral arrangements, provided by Petal and Stem, sponsored by Robert J. Anderson." She moved on. "The photography and videography package by Luminescent Studios, sponsored by Robert J. Anderson." A slight murmur rippled through the tables. People began to glance toward Robert. Brenda continued, methodical. The premium open bar service, sponsored by Robert J. Anderson. The rehearsal dinner at Vincenzo's, sponsored by Robert J. Anderson. The bridal suite for the evening, sponsored by Robert J. Anderson. With each item, her voice grew more deliberate. The list was long, painfully long. It was a financial autopsy of the entire wedding. The string quartet for the ceremony, sponsored by Robert J. Anderson. The wedding cake and desserts from Confections, sponsored by Robert J. Anderson. The vintage getaway car, sponsored by Robert J. Anderson. The room was utterly silent now, no more murmurs, just the clear, ringing voice of the coordinator, itemizing a fortune. Every head was turned toward Robert. He sat perfectly still, his face impassive, a monument of quiet dignity amidst the escalating tension. Brenda took a breath. She was nearing the end. And finally, the venue deposit and catering minimum fulfilled by Robert J. Anderson. She lowered the clipboard. The spotlight felt blinding. In the silence, you could hear a champagne flute clink against a table. Robert slowly turned his head. He looked directly at the head table, at Sarah. Her radiant smile had vanished. Her face was a mask of stunned, dawning horror. Her eyes were wide, locked on him, then flicking to the faces of her guests, who were now looking at her with expressions ranging from shock to outright judgment. Mark was staring at his plate, his neck flushed a deep, blotchy red. The coordinator's job was done. She had simply read the list, but in reading it, she had laid bare the truth. The nanny wasn't just the driver, he was the architect, he was the foundation, and he had just publicly presented the invoice. Brenda handed the microphone back to the DJ and walked off the floor. The DJ, flustered, fumbled with his equipment, queuing up a pop song to break the silence. But the spell was broken. The party's soul had shifted. Sarah stood up abruptly, the legs of her chair scraping loudly on the floor. She didn't look at Robert. She turned and fled the ballroom, a blur of white silk, with her new husband scrambling after her. Mark remained seated, a statue of humiliation. Linda reached over and took Robert's hand under the table. Her grip was fierce, trembling. She didn't say a word, she just held on. Robert took a slow sip of his now warm water. The cold, quiet thing that had stirred in him the night before was no longer stirring. It was settled. It was satisfied. The truth was out. It was no longer his burden to carry alone. It was now a shared, public fact, hanging in the air of the ballroom alongside the scent of gardenias and roast beef. He had not caused a scene. He had not raised his voice. He had simply allowed the facts to be heard. And in that hearing, every person in that room was forced to reevaluate the story they had been told. The devoted stepfather wasn't the villain of this piece. He was the silent, generous engine that had made the entire spectacle possible, and he had just been introduced, properly, to the audience. But this wasn't the end. It was merely the end of the beginning. The fallout was a gathering storm, and its first drops were about to fall. Across the room, Robert saw the mother of the groom standing up, her face set in lines of sharp disapproval, making a beeline not for him, but for where Mark still sat, crumbling under the weight of a credit he never earned. The real consequences were just walking in the door. The silence that followed the coordinator's voice was a living thing, thick and accusatory. It was broken by the scrape of a chair. The mother of the groom, Elena, a woman with the stern posture of a retired school principal, was indeed marching toward Mark, but she didn't stop at him. She bypassed him completely and walked straight up to Robert and Linda. She looked Robert directly in the eye. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice low but carrying, "my son failed to do his due diligence. We were under the impression Mark was the primary contributor. This changes the family narrative significantly. You have my apology and my respect." She gave a sharp, approving nod, turned on her heel, and went back to her table, leaving a fresh wave of whispers in her wake. That single act of public acknowledgement was more vindicating than any confrontation. But vindication from strangers is cold comfort. The real storm was brewing elsewhere. Sarah had returned to the ballroom, her face blotchy from tears, her new husband trailing behind her looking shell-shocked. She made her way to their table, but the energy had shifted. Guests offered strained smiles. The dancing resumed, but it was forced, a pantomime of celebration. Robert watched it all from his seat, a strange detachment settling over him. He had done the thing, the truth was out. Now he just had to live in the world he'd revealed. Linda leaned close, her voice a fierce whisper. "I'm leaving with you. Tonight, I'm not staying for the send-off. I am done." This was a seismic shift. Linda, who had spent 24 years mediating, soothing, and keeping this blended family from fracturing, had just declared her side, and it was his. They waited another 20 minutes, a polite buffer. Then, as the DJ announced the cake cutting, Robert and Linda stood up together. They didn't sneak out. They walked calmly through the center of the room, arm in arm. Every eye followed them. It was an exit, quiet and dignified, that screamed louder than any slamming door. The drive home was conducted in a silence heavier than any argument. Linda stared out the window, her jaw set. Finally, she spoke. "She called you the nanny." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of profound betrayal. "After everything, the nanny." "She said worse," Robert replied, his eyes on the road. He told her about the conversation he'd overheard in the kitchen, the expensive nanny comment, the dismissal of his financial support as merely his choice to play house. Linda made a small, pained sound. "I didn't know she felt that way, not that deeply. I thought it was just complicated." "It is complicated," Robert said, "but it's also very simple. She has a father, and it's not me." The house felt different when they entered. It was no longer just their home. It was the place they'd built for a family that, it turned out, only existed in their own hopes. Linda went straight upstairs. Robert heard the closet open, the sound of a suitcase being dragged across the carpet. She wasn't just emotionally leaving the wedding, she was physically preparing to leave something else. His phone, which had been on silent, began to light up on the kitchen counter. A text from Sarah, then another, then a call, which went to voicemail. He didn't need to listen to it yet. He knew the tone. He poured 2 glasses of water and went upstairs. Linda was sitting on the edge of the bed, the empty suitcase open beside her, her face in her hands. He set the water on the nightstand and sat next to her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She looked up, her eyes raw. "I'm thinking about the will." The words landed in the quiet room. This was the nuclear option, the final legal severance of the ties that the wedding had emotionally severed. "My will," Linda continued, her voice gaining strength. "Everything, the house, my retirement account, the life insurance, it all goes to you, and after you it was supposed to go to her, our daughter." She said the word "our" with a bitter twist. "That was the plan, a legacy for the family we made." Robert knew this. They had made simple mirror wills years ago, a standard practice. "I'm changing it," Linda said, the decision solidifying as she spoke. "Tomorrow, I am calling Paul Edgerton first thing." Paul was their estate attorney, a meticulous man in his 60s. "If I am merely your wife, and she is merely my biological daughter who sees you as hired help, then we should make the legal reality match the emotional one. She gets nothing." This was the escalation beyond the wedding. This was permanent. This was generational. "Lynn," Robert started, but she cut him off. "No, don't. This isn't revenge, Robert. This is accuracy. You heard her. You are not her father. Therefore, you have no obligation to her. And her voice broke for a second. "I have no obligation to leave the product of our shared life to someone who disrespects its foundation. She has her real dad. Let him provide her legacy." The phone rang again downstairs. Sarah. The insistent buzzing was the sound of the consequence wave hitting the shore. Robert finally went down and listened to the voicemail. Sarah's voice was a tearful shriek, stripped of all its wedding day grace. "How could you do that to me? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You ruined my wedding. Was that your plan, to make me look like a greedy, ungrateful bitch? I hate you." He deleted it. The next voicemail was from Mark, calmer but simmering with fury. "Robert, we need to talk. This was a low blow. Using money to manipulate and shame your own family. That's not what a man does. Call me." He deleted that one too. The third call was from Brenda, the coordinator. Her message was professional but strained. "Mr. Anderson, a quick follow-up. The final venue invoice is due tomorrow by 5 p.m. It's $9,400. Given the events, I just wanted to confirm you are still the point of contact for payment. Please call me back. The final bill. The piper demanding to be paid. This was the trap, and Robert now saw it with perfect clarity. If he paid, he looked like a doormat, financing his own humiliation. If he refused to pay, he would be the villain who stiffed the vendors and ruined his stepdaughter's credit on her way out the door. Sarah and Mark would weaponize that forever. It was a checkmate move he hadn't anticipated. He went back upstairs. Linda was on her phone, scrolling. Paul Edgerton's office opens at 8:30, she said, not looking up. There's another problem, Robert said, and told her about the final invoice. Linda's head snapped up. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. It was a smile Robert had never seen before. It was the smile of a mother whose protective instincts had been forged into a weapon. "Oh," she said softly, "is that so?" She put her phone down. "We pay it." Robert stared at her. "What?" "We pay every single cent. Tonight, if we can, we get a receipt, a paid-in-full receipt." Her mind was racing, he could see it. "But we don't just pay it to the venue, we pay it directly to each vendor, and we have them email the receipt to us and to Sarah and to Mark, with a note. Final invoice for Sarah's wedding, paid by Robert and Linda Anderson. Best wishes for your marriage." Robert began to see it. It wasn't just payment. It was documentation. It was a paper trail of generosity so complete, so irrefutable, that no future rewrite of history could ever erase it. It was the financial equivalent of carving his name into stone. "And then," Linda said, her eyes gleaming with a terrible clarity, "we call Paul, and we don't just change the will, we add a codicil, a specific separate document that outlines why. We list the braces, the car, the college loan, this wedding, every receipt, every check image attached as an exhibit. We make the reason for the disinheritance not emotional, but factual. A forensic audit of loyalty." She stood up, packing now. "She wants a transactional relationship? Fine, we'll give her one. Here is the full accounting of the transaction. And here is the balance due, 0. The account is closed." It was brutal, it was legal. It was the ultimate escalation. The wedding humiliation was a public moment. This would be a private, legal, and permanent severance. It would sit in a fireproof cabinet in Paul Edgerton's office, waiting, a sleeping dragon of consequence. Robert felt a chill that wasn't fear. It was awe. This was the other side of the gentle woman who packed lunches. This was the lioness whose cub had betrayed the pride. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet. "Okay, let's do it all." His phone buzzed with a new text. It was from Sarah again, the tone shifting from rage to a panicked attempt at damage control. "Dad, please, can we talk? I'm so sorry about what I said. I was stressed. It came out wrong. Please call me." He showed it to Linda. She read it and snorted. "She's not sorry she said it. She's sorry people heard it. And she's sorry the money might stop." Linda took the phone from his hand. "Don't answer, not tonight. Let her sit in it. Let her and Mark stare at that paid-in-full receipt when it arrives. Let them wonder what comes next." She was right. The power had shifted. They were no longer pleading for recognition. They were accountants closing the books. Robert looked at his wife, really looked at her in the dim light of their bedroom. The hurt was still there, a deep bruise around her heart, but over it was a layer of steel forged in the fire of that ballroom. He realized a profound truth. For 24 years, he thought he'd been protecting her by keeping the peace. All he'd done was force her to live in a war zone. Now she had picked up a sword, and she was terrifying. "Tomorrow," Linda said, turning off her bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness save for the glow of his phone. "Tomorrow, we start the rest of our lives, the two of us, on our terms." As he lay there in the dark, listening to the silence where his phone had finally stopped buzzing, Robert understood the final, crushing truth of the evening. The wedding hadn't just revealed his stepdaughter's heart, it had revealed his wife, and one of those revelations offered a future. The other merely settled the past. The battle lines weren't just drawn. The first volley had already been fired, not with a shout, but with the quiet click of a mouse authorizing a bank transfer. The real war for their family's soul was just beginning, and it was being waged not in a ballroom, but in the sterile, unforgiving arena of law and finance. Monday morning arrived with the clean, sharp light of a world reset. At 8:30 exactly, Linda was on the phone with Paul Edgerton's office. She didn't request an appointment. She informed them she was coming in at 2 that afternoon and needed him to clear his schedule. Her tone brooked no argument. The receptionist, familiar with Linda's normally gentle demeanor, simply said, "Of course, Mrs. Anderson, we'll see you at 2." While Linda prepared for that meeting, Robert got to work on the financial front. He logged into their joint banking portal. The final venue invoice was $9,400. He didn't just pay the lump sum to the venue. He followed Linda's plan. He tracked down the direct payment portals for each individual vendor Brenda had listed. The florist, $1,800, paid. The photographer, $2,200, paid. The caterer, the bakery, the rental company. One by one, he submitted payments, each transaction a silent, digital period at the end of a sentence. For each payment, he entered the memo line, "Final payment Sarah Miller Wedding." And in the email field for the receipt, he entered 3 addresses, his, Linda's, and Sarah's personal email. He added Mark's email as well. He wanted no ambiguity, no room for a fictional narrative where Mark swooped in to save the day. By 11:15, it was done. Over $46,000 in total wedding costs, now officially and transparently settled. The email inbox began to ping with confirmations. The receipts landed like subpoenas. The first response came not from Sarah, but from Mark. A single-line email sent at 11:43. "This is petty and pathetic. You're trying to buy respect. It doesn't work that way." Robert didn't reply. He forwarded the email to Linda with a single word, Exhibit A. At 1:45, they drove to Paul Edgerton's office in the city. Paul was waiting for them in a conference room with a view of the river. He was a man who understood that family law was rarely about law and mostly about family. He listened, his hands steepled as Linda spoke. She was calm, methodical. She didn't cry. She presented the facts as if presenting a boardroom report, the timeline of Robert's involvement. The financial contributions, with the newly printed wedding receipts in a neat stack. She played the voicemail from Sarah on speakerphone, the one screaming, "I hate you." She read aloud the text, where Sarah called Robert basically the nanny. When she finished, the room was silent. Paul removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "Linda," he said softly, "Robert, what you're describing is a fundamental breach of the familial relationship these documents are designed to protect. You're not just changing beneficiaries, you're documenting a moral disinheritance." "We are aligning the legal reality with the lived one," Linda said, her voice firm. Paul nodded. "We can do that. We'll draft a new will and a revocable trust. Everything passes to the trust, with Robert as the primary beneficiary and sole trustee. Upon his passing, the assets would then go to a named charity, not to Sarah. We will also draft a separate letter of intent. It's not legally binding, but it explains the why for any future challenge. We will attach every piece of evidence you have, the receipts, the transcripts, the loan documents for college. We make the reason undeniable." "How long?" Robert asked. "The documents by end of week. Signing next Monday, it will be ironclad." As they stood to leave, Paul added one more thing. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I've known Sarah since she was a girl. This is a profound failure of character, on her part, not yours." That verdict, from an impartial third party, was its own kind of relief. The storm, however, was not content to remain on paper. That evening, as Robert and Linda were eating a quiet dinner, headlights washed across the kitchen wall. A car door slammed, then another. Footsteps on the front walk. Linda didn't move. "Don't answer it." The doorbell rang, then knocking, persistent, angry knocking. Robert stood and looked through the peephole. Sarah and Mark stood on the porch, their faces etched with a mix of fury and panic. Sarah's new husband was in the car, engine running. Robert opened the door, but only halfway, his body blocking the entrance. "This isn't a good time." Sarah tried to push past him, but he stood firm. "We need to talk," she demanded, her voice shrill. "You can't just cut me out. That's my inheritance. That's my house." Linda appeared behind Robert, a silent pillar of strength. "You made your position perfectly clear, Sarah. At your wedding, in the kitchen, on my voicemail. You have a father, go talk to him." Mark stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Now listen here, Robert. This has gone far enough. You can't punish her for wanting a relationship with her real father. That's monstrous. And that money is Linda's. You have no right to it. Robert looked at Mark, really looked at him. The man who had contributed $500 to an $11,000 dental bill and now stood on his porch claiming moral authority. The money, Robert said, his voice dangerously quiet, has already done its job. It paid for the wedding you took credit for. Our financial obligation to you, Sarah, is complete. As for the rest, it's Linda's money, and she has decided where it goes. The discussion is over. I'll contest it, Sarah yelled, tears of rage streaming down her face. I'll take you to court. I'll tell everyone what a greedy, cruel man you are. Linda spoke then, her voice cutting through the night air like a knife. You do that, Sarah, you take us to court. And in discovery, we will enter into the permanent record every single check, every loan document, every receipt. We will play the nanny voicemail for a judge. We will submit the testimonials from every vendor you claimed your real dad paid for. We will give you the spotlight you seem to crave. But it will be a spotlight on the truth. Now get off my porch. The finality in her voice was absolute. Sarah stared at her mother, seeing not the soft mediator, but a stranger with a will of steel. The fight drained from her, replaced by a dawning, horrifying comprehension. She had overplayed her hand. She had bet that the endless well of a mother's love and a stepfather's patience was bottomless. She had just found the bottom. Mark pulled at her arm. Come on, let's go. We'll get a lawyer, a real one. They retreated to the car and sped off. Robert closed the door. The lock clicked into place with a sound that felt symbolic. The following Monday, they signed the new will and trust documents in Paul Edgerton's office. The letter of intent was 12 pages long, with 37 exhibits attached. It was a brutal, clinical masterpiece. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The phone calls from Sarah stopped. The angry texts ceased. They were met with silence, which was its own answer. But here is the final, surprising detail. 6 months after the wedding, Robert received a statement from the loan servicer for the parent plus college loan. He had continued making the monthly payments out of habit. He logged in to check the balance. It was zero. A lump sum payment of over $31,000 had been made the week prior, paying off the remaining principal and interest in full. The payment source was listed as an external checking account. It took Robert only a moment to recognize the account number. It was from Linda's personal savings account, money she had inherited from her own mother years ago, money she had always said was her just-in-case fund. He found her in the garden. You paid off the loan, he said. She didn't look up from the rose bush she was pruning. I did. That was your money, your safety net. She snapped a dead bloom off. My safety net is you. That loan was the last legal tether to a past that caused you nothing but pain. I cut it. Consider it a gift. From me to the man who showed up. No strings attached, for once. Robert Anderson, the man who had built his life on quiet, uncredited giving, found himself on the receiving end of a gift so profound it left him speechless. The debt, both financial and emotional, was finally, irrevocably cleared. The story doesn't have a happy reunion. There is no tearful reconciliation, no deathbed forgiveness. Sarah's life moved on, shadowed by the choice she made at her wedding. Robert and Linda's life moved on too, lighter, freer, and built on the solid, honest ground of mutual respect. The wedding coordinators list had been a public reckoning, but the real resolution happened in the private, silent spaces, in a lawyer's office, on a front porch at night, and in a garden where a simple loan was forgiven. The nanny had left the building. The man, and the wife who finally chose him, remained. So what is the price of a father? Is it the sum total of orthodontics, car payments, and tuition checks? Or is it something that exists entirely outside the realm of transaction, in the quiet, daily showing up that asks for nothing in return? Robert's story forces us to sit with an uncomfortable truth about the architecture of modern families. We live in an era where 65% of families are blended, where roles are negotiated, not inherited. We expect step-parents to perform all the duties of parenthood, the financial support, the emotional labor, the chauffeur services, often without granting them the title, the authority, or the simple, profound respect that comes with it. They are asked to build a home on land whose deed is held by someone else. Sarah's cruelest mistake wasn't ingratitude. It was believing that love could be compartmentalized, that she could accept the financial and practical output of a man for 24 years while reserving the sacred title of father for the biological contributor who offered little more than his DNA and a late-in-life apology. She treated Robert's devotion as a utility bill, something you pay for and use, but don't think about once the service is rendered. She forgot that people are not utilities, they are hearts, and hearts, when treated as a convenience, eventually stop dispensing their currency. The real victory here isn't the changed will or the paid-off loan, it's the clarity. For Robert, it was the clarity to finally see a relationship for what it was, not what he hoped it could be. For Linda, it was the clarity to choose her husband, to defend the life they built together against the person who sought to diminish it. Their peace was not found in reconciliation, but in the honest, painful acceptance of a fractured bond. Sometimes, peace is the mending of a break. It's the calm that comes after you stop trying to hold the broken pieces together and simply sweep up the shards. This story leaves us with a lingering question that echoes far beyond this one family. In a world of chosen families and blended lines, what do we owe to those who choose us? What is the value of the man who shows up, not because biology commands it, but because love does? And when that choice is met with dismissal, when is it not weakness, but strength, to finally close the ledger? If this story resonated with you, if it touched on something real in your own life or the life of someone you know, then do us a simple favor, hit that like button. It tells us these are the kinds of raw human stories you want to hear. And make sure you're subscribed. We dive deep into the complexities of family, loyalty, and the quiet battles fought in living rooms and wedding halls every single week. I want you there for the next one. In the end, Robert got the only thing he ever truly wanted from Sarah, though it came in a form he never expected. He got the truth, and with the truth, however painful, a man can finally build something real.